good things about living in Wigan, the world-famous Wigan Pier.
Come and see the market.
We all like the pies in Wigan.
The rugby stadium, well, they play football as well, I think. I'm not certain. It's a round ball.
If Wigan was an animal, it'd be a cat. It's a familiar animal. Wigan's a very familiar town.
Mark Steele's in town.
Thanks very much. Welcome to Mark Steele's in Town, which this week comes from the delicate, posh country village of Wigan. A town that I think everyone should be sent to if they have ever said, the thing is, these days we're all middle class, really, aren't we? I was in a cafe in the indoor market where you can buy this stew called lobbies and tea from a huge green pot, and there was this old couple about a yard away from me, and they were looking at me as if to say, he's not from round here. And then one of them pointing at me, he said, Manchester thespian, I shouldn't wonder. Barack Obama could have come in and he'd have gone, stop boat. It is clearly a very working-class town in the old-fashioned sense. For example, the two attitudes that you seem to get here are extreme friendliness and wanting to fight. It's like everyone wants to say, hello there, can I help you with your bags? Pop in for dinner, there's plenty of stew on. Can you just excuse me for a moment? I'm going to smash you in the face. Would you like a lift to A&E? It's no trouble. It's also a very beautiful town for rambling, which is why the town centre trail booklet that I've got here suggests a series of Wigan walks where you can take in the beauty of the architecture. So it says, looking up is rewarding. And then in huge capitals it says, but take care not to bump into obstacles. Now, you've also, and this puzzles, I think, people coming from outside, you've got two stations here. Most towns, I have to tell you, Wigan, even towns, if you can believe such a thing, that are bigger than yours, do make do with one. But here, there's Wigan North Western and Wigan Walgate, and the distance between them is about 6 feet. So it is handy, because if you are at the Wigan North Western station, you can get a Virgin train to Warrington, get one from there to Manchester Piccadilly, go to platform 14 for a train to Bolton, get one from there to Wigan Walgate, and that saves you all the trouble of crossing the road. Ian McKellen is from Wigan, as I'm sure you all know. He's claimed that he first learnt about acting by watching the market traders here. That must have been a very interesting debut in Shakespeare, mustn't it? Right. Breathe deeply and get into character. Here goes. All right, ladies, I'm not asking for £5 of flesh. I'm not asking for £4, £3.5, £3.25. I'll tell you what, I'm not asking for 3. All this gold, £1 of flesh. Stick your hands up, ladies, it's yours. So much happens in Wigan, really. It's not going to be possible to even touch on very much of it because so much happens here, the local papers can't fit it all in. For example, and this is, I'm sure you'll have read this story, this week in the Wigan Evening Post, there was a headline, Horses Moved. Can you imagine the chaos in the office when that story came through? Hey, everybody stop on the front page. You know those horses near Wigan? They've moved. There's witnesses and everything. There are a lot more cheerful stories if you look hard enough. For example, there's a book, Peering at Wigan, by a local journalist, and he tells this charming story about Wigan. In my 30 years as a reporter, the best story to emerge was the story of a man who spent 8 years in his council house living under the floorboards. Apparently, I mean, that's not bad, is it? Apparently, the police were after this bloke, so he made a hole under his living room carpet, burrowed under his floorboards, and lived there for 8 years. Which was a genius idea, because that stopped him from having to spend 18 months cooped up in a cell. In his account, at one point, he says, after 3.5 years down there, my wife got me a mattress to lie on. Years? After 3.5 years of her husband living under the floorboard, she finally poked her head in and said, is there anything down there you need? Another thing that's very impressive here is that you've got your own language called Wiganese. Now, I can imagine this must create problems, because I was in a cafe not far from here, and there was a lad who worked in there, and he gave me some soup, and I said, "Can I have some pepper, please?" And I waited about 10, 15 minutes, and I thought, where's he gone? And he was walking around in a bit of a daze, and I said, "You haven't found that pepper, have you?" And he said, "Well, to be honest with you, I'm not sure what you want. Do you want a newspaper or some pepper to write on?" So, it's not very middle class here, I suspect. Now, this was partly, of course, the point that was made by your most famous visitor, George Orwell, because George Orwell came here in 1936, 1937, to write a book about the town, and he called it The Road to Wigan Pier. Now, the pier is off the canal, but what surprised me here is that there is also a river, the River Douglas. What was the canal for then? These poor navvies must have spent hundreds of years going, "Oh, I tell you what, this is absolutely backbreaking, but at least we'll have the satisfaction of knowing that they'll be able to transport things by water along through the town at the end of it. Just a few more deaths and a couple of years more, and we'll be..." And then they must have finished and gone, "Ah, there we are, it's a job well..." And then they'll turn around and go, well, you look at that! How did we not notice that? How long's it been there?" The pier was already famous before Orwell mentioned it, because people made jokes about Wigan's pier. Because, of course, as you all know, it isn't really a pier. It's actually a little bump in the towpath. Even so, there are little brown signs on roads, even the motorway, telling you, "This way to Wigan Pier." The same as they would for Cheddar Gorge or Historic York or something that exists. And there are some classic lines in George Orwell's book here about how the middle class, no matter how left-wing, were brought up to think that the working class smell. But when I look back through the book, I found some other less quoted lines. "It's a world from which vegetation has been banished. Nothing existed except smoke, shale, ice, mud, ashes, and foul water. But even Wigan is beautiful compared with Sheffield." The book was written during the Depression, when the Prime Minister at the time was Stanley Baldwin, who in 1908 inherited £200,000 from his industrialist father. Hard, of course, for us now to imagine these times when a Tory Prime Minister with vast amounts of unearned wealth was trying to sort out an economic crisis by cutting money that goes to everyone apart from the rich. We can barely imagine those days. Now, a lot of the road to Wigan Pier is about the miners, and the numbers are extraordinary. At one point in the Wigan and Lee coalfields, there were 100,000 miners. There were pits almost everywhere, so at any one time there must have been more people under the ground than on top of it. No wonder some of you aren't happy unless you're under a floorboard. Now, the mining started here in Roman times, apparently. Then by 1771, according to a travelling writer, Nathaniel Spencer, the coal dug up in the centre of the town is perhaps the best in the universe. In the universe? Did he say, "I have travelled to several galaxies"? While other planets contain high-quality kryptonite, for coal I would always rely on Wigan. The pits have all been shut now, of course, as of the mills, but Wigan does manage to outdo other industrial places on that front, because when the mill by the pier was shut, it was then turned into a museum about mills. But now that's been shut as well. That is grim, when things that are only open to remember things that have been shut get shut. You are one step ahead, Wigan. Now, the last thing I want to do here is to make out that Wigan is only about grimy industrial life and blokes fighting. There's obviously loads more to it than that, so I turned back to the trail pamphlet and I found this. The King's Head Inn was the meeting place of the Wigan Master Cloggers Association. In 1909, there were 63 cloggers. This distinctive footwear with thick wooden soles gave rise to the bizarre pastime of clog fighting. This involved purring or kicking and up and down, kicking of standing and fallen opponents. The combatants were sometimes nude, and the majority of the audience was women. And this is in a quaint little pamphlet for ramblers. This is written to display your genteel side. This is what's brilliant about Wigan. Anywhere else, they'd think a sport where the object was to purr your opponent by stamping on him with a wooden iron shoe would be considered a tad eccentric. But here you think, oh, it's not grimy enough. I know we'll do it in nude. One consequence of the industrial past here is your nickname, Pie Eaters, which is what everyone else in Lancashire calls people from Wigan. Apparently, this is because in the general strike of 1926, the Wigan miners went back to work when the miners of the Lee coalfield stayed out on strike, and the Lee miners said that the Wigan miners would be eating humble pie forever. Even so, the name would only have stuck if you did, in Wigan, eat more than the average quota of pies for a town. Like, for example, there is a sticker that I've seen on vans that says no pies are left in this van overnight. And Wigan is home of the World Pie Eating Championships, which is a unique event for so many reasons. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Tony Callaghan. You're organiser of the World Pie Eating Championships, Tony.
Yeah.
You're the sort of Seb Blatter of the situation.
Definitely.
So there's always controversy then around the Pie Eating Championships. There was a Viagra incident, apparently.
Yeah, we had pies laced with Viagra, but it was giving people stiff lips, so we had a bit of a problem with it.
Because the world does need more horny fat blokes with gravy dripping down them, doesn't it? Now, the winner, it's not a matter of how many pies you eat, it's who can eat one pie the quickest. And I actually took part in the competition this year. I was always an outside bet, being from the south, because when the referee shouted, "Go!" I went, could I have some salad and some dressing with that? But, Tony, I think it's probably right to say that you would prefer a Wigan champion, wouldn't you?
Last year it went to Bolton, and we weren't very happy of it going over to Bolton. We'd rather a Wiganer win it, and of course this year a Wiganer has won it.
Yeah. Even though the bloke who finished his pie first was from Salford.
Yeah, but the guy from Salford, I mean, when we went over and it was a steward's enquiry, he had more pie in his face and on his hands and on the floor. So, I mean, he was just disallowed.
I'm afraid it looked to me as if it was probably arranged by yourself, Simon Cowell and the Pakistani cricket team. But thanks very, very much, Tony. Pies aren't all that's eaten in Wigan, of course. There are the lobbies, which is a plate of stew, and a portion costs about twopence, and it is magnificently Wigan. I looked on a forum called Wigan World, and there was a discussion on what people miss about Wigan when they're away, and the thing mentioned most of all was lobbies. And then someone who must have known very well how to wind up someone from Wigan went, "There's no wrong with lobbies, but I do hope they're made with low fat, low cholesterol, no food colourings and environmentally friendly ingredients that comply with the EC standards." There was replies such as the one that said, "Lobbies are never made to EEC standards, only to Wigan standards, and they're best in world." Even lobbies is not the most important culinary export from this town that is like a throbbing bag of Michelin stars. Because Wigan is the home of the Uncle Joe's mint ball. For anyone who doesn't know or isn't familiar with the delicacy of the Uncle Joe's mint ball, it's a Wigan-based sweet that comes in an old red packet with a picture of Uncle Joe in a top hat, and it's made in an old brick factory. And if you go in there and say, "Your mint balls were mentioned on the radio," they'll say, "Radio? But it's Christmas 1864. I was almost disappointed to find that they've got a website. But even on their website, the advertising is superbly Victorian. It's just a list of comments from around the world, such as Ashley in Nottingham, who says, "On holiday in Spain recently, we gave an Uncle Joe's mint ball to the hotel's resident entertainer who had a sore throat. In no time at all, he was singing like Pavarotti." Of course he was. So they should do more of them. I think we should write more of them. One I thought of was, on a recent trip up the Amazon, we encountered a hitherto undiscovered tribe who planned to spear and cook us. So we offered them an Uncle Joe's mint ball each, and after one chew, they made us king and queen, and now they worship us and believe that when you die, your soul goes to Wigan. I went round the plant. You should go. All go. It's brilliant. It is the cutest factory. The only thing that lets it down is that all the workers there are 2 feet high with orange faces. They work 24 hours a day in conditions currently being investigated by Amnesty International. Now, for the full Wigan experience, you need to finish your lobbies, take your mint balls to see the Wigan Warriors play rugby league. Now, I have to confess, I struggle a little bit with rugby. I mean, I speak as a sports fanatic. Football, tennis, golf, canoeing. I can watch anything. But rugby, I do struggle with it because it all seems to be decided on the penalties, and that seems peculiar to me because I can't work out why you get a penalty, because half the time they're just piling into each other. Boof, boof, boof. And the commentator's going, oh, that's a fantastic bit of dislocation work going on there on the scrum half. Oh, look at his head, he's nearly snapped it right off. Fantastic work going on there. Oh, that testicle's not going anywhere for a while. And then a couple of minutes later, the ball just bobbles out. Penalty! And I think, what's that for? And they go, oh, incorrect use of a preposition. What? But the supporters, it strikes me, are amazingly friendly, very, very different from football. But that doesn't mean there's not a rivalry. When I was first shown round Wigan a few weeks ago, and the bloke who was showing me round, we got through the shopping centre to where the Wigan Warriors club shop is. And I said, oh, I just want to go in there and have a look round. And he stood outside. He said, are you going to come in and have a look? And he suddenly, a bit friendly, he just went, no. I said, just to come in. He said, Mark, I'm from St Helens. I'm not joking. So, while I was there, I bought this book, The Wigan Warriors. And I thought this should cure me of my southern prejudice, assuming that all rugby is just about violence. So I turned to a section on interesting facts. And I thought, interesting facts, this will be about stuff like twins who've played on the same side or something like that. And it says, Wigan prop forward Barry McDermott was the first person in Britain to be restrained by police using CS gas. After the 17-stone hardman apparently became aggressive outside an Oldham nightclub. They make you so proud, you sporting hero. A little bit later, at the Central Park homecoming following Wigan's 1994 Wembley victory, Neil Cowie and Jason Robinson tried some light vandalism in the changing room. Robinson flowered about with a lump hammer, while Cowie charged across the room and butted the wall. His head went through the plasterboard and his ears got stuck. To be fair, Wigan obviously has a magnificent rugby league history, 19 championships, the dominant club in England. But the highlight, I think it's fair to say, was probably in 1992 when they won the Challenge Cup final, and the guest of honour was Prime Minister John Major, who decided to pop into the changing room to congratulate them. And according to this history, as John Major passed the showers, he encountered second row forward Billy McGinty wearing nothing but a pineapple ring as a genital appendage. The relationship this town has with rugby, I don't think can be a coincidence, because it can feel as if the town won't compromise in a sense, because this one Lancashire town has had the most extraordinary international impact on music. Because in the 1960s, some mods were listening to Bo Diddley and other blues and soul singers from America in Stoke and Manchester and Blackpool. And so the whole genre of music came about called Northern Soul, because it was played in the northern clubs, not as I thought when I first heard the phrase soul sung in a northern way. R-E-S-P-E-C-T, upper that's what I'll get from thee. Not that. Not that. And then in 1973, a new club called the Wigan Casino started, and it went on all night until 8 in the morning. Now, the reason that they were able to stay up dancing all night was connected to the fact that they'd taken some tablets. The police were aware of this, so there were incidents like the one in the book Night Shift that mentions this story of one clubber that says, the train pulled into Preston and a mob of cops boarded and informed us not to move while his officers searched everyone. Luckily, we'd brought along some Burton's meat and potato pies. So one of my mates carefully removed the detachable pastry tops, scooped out just enough of the delicious filling and replaced the empty spaces with our gear. Now, ideally, I would like to think that these pies were then accidentally picked up by an elderly couple who'd have had the pies for Sunday dinner and then spent the next 3 weeks going, isn't the weather awful? Have you seen my teeth? The youngsters give us no respect. I've got to see a specialist Wednesday. I waited half an hour for a number 35. Philly said to fall again. We didn't have tumble dryers in them days. You can put the kettle on, can you? I'm parched. Most of the most popular songs at the casino were fairly obscure records made and forgotten a few years earlier in America until discovered by the casino DJs. And then it became known all around the world, so that stars like Edwin Starr and Jackie Wilson came over to Wigan to perform live in the casino. I think just an extraordinary image that Edwin Starr was probably walking through the indoor market with a bloke going, Manchester thespian, I shouldn't wonder. So, it is brilliant to have with us here tonight Russ Winstanley. Well, Russ, what was your role with the Wigan Casino to start with?
It's just the fact that I was DJing at Wigan Rugby League Club, and as I was into the Northern Soul side of things, so I said, well, let's have a look if we can put an all-nighter on at Wigan Casino. And I went there, and there's a guy in his 50s called Jerry Marshall. I went in and I said, any chance of doing some all-nighters here? And Jerry went, you must be off your head, lad. So that was a good start, really, with Jerry. Yes, September 23rd, 73, we started the all-nighters at the casino. And at first it was, everybody's saying, hang on a second, it must be a big den of iniquity and everybody having drugs and sex and all the rest of it and everything. Unfortunately, it wasn't really like that, but...
So did you get any police or anything coming in there snooping about?
Yeah, it was probably the first place where they had a plainclothes policeman. And he got into the music so much and loved the people, he used to clock off and come back in.
Well, thanks very much, Russ, for coming on tonight. The club burnt down, didn't it, Russ, in the end? And it's now the grand shopping centre with all the usual chain stores. I was saying to Russ yesterday that the shopping centre should be called Northern Soulless. But the club scene in Wigan now is a little bit different, I think it's fair to say. It's mostly centred around King Street, which has about 12 clubs. The police close off the whole road on a Friday and Saturday night, and in the morning a council truck comes round and sweeps up the bodies. Now, having all the clubs in a row means that the binge drinking is all contained in one manageable 100-yard stretch of madness. So there's everything the clubber needs in that one bit of road. 12 clubs, 2 kebab shops, a dentist, and a spinal injury clinic. So that's why you hear blokes there on a Sunday morning going, oh, we're great crack, like we come out a walkabout, went in jumping jacks, 5 bottles of WKD, got kebab and fart in queue, both got knocked out, like, or teeth missing, got crown and 2 fillings, down clinic, got lower vertebrae replaced, went back walkabout, started on Jaeger bombs, banging. Even Northern Soul, though, might not be the most globally known music export from Wigan, because... with all the things the town could boast about, the one most publicly celebrated is George Formby, who is utterly Wigan. He was born in Westminster Street, he married in Wigan Registry Office. There's a statue of him in the shopping centre, although as statues go, I think it's fair to say it's hardly on the scale of something Saddam Hussein would have commissioned of himself. But maybe this is because George was more controversial than people necessarily realise. His famous song When I'm Cleaning Windows was banned by the BBC. They banned a song of his called My Little Ukulele in My Hand for the verse that goes, I felt so shy and bashful sitting there, because the things she said I didn't understand. She said, your love just turns me dizzy, come on big boy, get busy, but I kept my ukulele in my hand. And then when his son's born, it goes, my heart did jump with joy. I could see he was a boy, for he had a ukulele in his hand. And the BBC comment was, Mr. Formby's musical instrument represents for him a substitute phallus. But the episode that might be most surprising is the one where he went to South Africa shortly before apartheid was set up, and George and his wife Beryl, who was his manager, were told that they had to play to segregated audiences. So in protest, they did 20 free shows in townships to black audiences. And so the head of the Nationalist Party, a man who would be Prime Minister under apartheid South Africa, called Daniel Malan, came to his hotel and warned him not to carry out any more despicable stunts, as he put it, to which Beryl said to him, "Then why don't you piss off, you're a horrible little man." George Formby and his wife as radical anti-apartheid activists. It's like finding out that Little and Large spent 5 years fighting with Che Guevara. It just makes... Beryl was known as a fairly dictatorial manager. For example, when he was in Cinderella in Leeds, she had it written into his contract that none of the rest of the staff were allowed to stare at him. How did that work? In a panto? The others having to go, "Hello, boys and girls. Now, I can't find Mr. Formby. So if you see him, you will look away, won't you, or we'll have to pay a fine." Now, in music and literature, as well as rugby and flexible descriptions of peers, Wigan has obviously had a much bigger impact on the world than almost anywhere, I suppose. So I'll leave you, Wigan, with George Orwell's original description of the town that he wrote in one of the earlier drafts. "Disease here is rife. The sick lie in gutters, in a road called King Street, where in their addled state they utter plaintive cries such as, 'Get us a taxi!' and, 'Oh no, I've been barred from dentist.' Conditions here are so cramped that this morning I saw a card in the post office offering rented accommodation for a cosy apartment under the floorboards. Despite my status as a southerner, the locals display an endearing air of generosity towards me, and one muscular fellow kindly offered me a pineapple ring as a gift. And there I must leave you, for there is always another place to explore, each with its unique fascinations. And tomorrow I must travel many miles by rail, leaving behind me the dusky, calm warmth of Wigan Northwest to make the long and arduous journey to Wigan Wallgate." Thanks very much, Wigan. Thank you.
Mark Steele's In Town was written and performed by Mark Steele, with additional material by Pete Sinclair. The producer was Sam Bryant.